Now we're going to Finland, as I said. We're going to Eero Voutilanien. Do I pronounce it?
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, it's you. About the rules of reporting in the Finnish Parliament. You're welcome.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to have this short presentation on behalf of the Finnish delegation. I planned this presentation together with Maarit, Peltola, Teuvo, and Niklas, Varisto, who are there on the 4th row. Do you want to wave or something like that? Yeah. They are happy to answer any questions if you have. Me too, of course, during this conference. This presentation is based on joint discussion and development in the Finnish Records Office over the course of recent years, and the aim of our contribution is to continue the useful discussion on the principles of reporting that took place at the IPRS meeting in Prague last year. Particularly, we would like to take a practical look into the linguistic decisions that are made in reporting. We also have a general presentation of our work and methods and practices ready. If you want to have a look at it, we can send it to you by email. But I will not go to these aspects in this presentation. The principles of reporting in the Finnish Parliament have changed very much in the last few decades. This citation shows how parliamentary reporting was done in its early days in the late 1800s. The reporter's job was to, quote, correct a contemptually and technically bad speech into exemplary condition regarding both matter and linguistic form, and to, quote, compose confusing statements into such shape that it was easy to get a hold of their content. In practice, this meant quite heavy editing so that the difference between original speeches and the ones published in the records was sometimes very big. Actually, some early MPs complained that after reporting the individual speeches sounded like, quote, they were given by one man. They were men at that time, almost exclusively. Actually, this citation was a good description of parliamentary reporting in Finland for nearly 100 years. Until the late 1980s. Since the 80s, Finnish parliamentary reporters have paid more attention to the authenticity and individuality of the speeches. This is a result from many changes both inside and outside of the parliament. First, since the beginning of the 1950s, the speeches have been recorded with audio recorders, and this has enabled a reporter to pay more attention to linguistic details in the speeches. It has also made it easier to determine the faithfulness of the written record, as was discussed in Prague last year. More recently, online video broadcasts have also raised the question of how much difference there should be between the video and the written record. Because they both are now accessible to everyone and very easy to compare if some citizen has the will to do so. There have also been many changes in the parliamentary speech culture and the language attitudes in general. Modern parliamentary speeches show considerable stylistic variation, and differences from the written standard language are not always seen as simply wrong. Instead, they can be very important in marking the individual style and political image of the MP. This view is supported by modern studies in linguistics and interaction. Overall, these changes have led to a shift from standardization towards more toleration of naturally occurring linguistic variation. This in turn has led to a new need for a new reporting principles and systematic guidelines for reporting. Our aim is also to publish a short introduction of our principles in our public web pages so that the readers of the record know exactly what kind of changes have been made in the reporting process. When reporting speech in written form, we think that it's good to be aware of the relationship between spoken and written language. And this is a very rough dichotomy of the subject to illustrate the point. First, speech is of course auditive, and writing is visual. Speech is also a dynamic action that happens in time, whereas writing is an object that is situated in space in some way. In speech, all the participants share the same situation and can immediately reply to each other, but in writing, the situations of producing and receiving the message can be separated by even a very long period of time. Speech is usually planned and produced fast at the same time, which leaves traces of planning and correction that are not common in writing. And finally, the hearer receives the message only once, usually, but the reader may read the text many times to get a hold of its content. Speech and writing also have different non-verbal means of communication, which have also their own meaning in the expressions. The main point of this comparison is to highlight that we think that speech and writing are in some sense fundamentally different, and therefore it is only natural that they don't always follow the same logic or even the same grammar. Neither is also any better or more correct than the other. They are just used in different situations, even though the writing as a system is sometimes more appreciated historically than speech. Of course, plenary sessions in the parliament seem to be somewhere in the middle of these two categories, because many speeches are written beforehand and only one speaker is allowed to speak at a time, etc. Reporting can never be completely neutral or objective, we think, because it requires choices of adapting the speech into writing. And all these choices affect how the MP and his or her speech are viewed in the public. We think that this makes it necessary to consider why and for whom the record is made. We think that, most importantly, the plenary record is an open source of information for the public. This means that the citizens and the media can be seen as the key audiences of the plenary record, even though the records are also widely read by the MPs, officials, and researchers for different purposes. This has some important consequences for the principles of reporting. Perhaps most importantly, we follow a wide definition of grammatical correctness. Even differences from the written standard language may sometimes be very important in creating the individual style and image of the MP, which means that we should be very careful in our so-called corrections in the records. Big changes in the language might change the nature of the original speech in some way. Our key goal is to make sure that the reader of the record can understand the session in the same way that the hearer of the session, not worse or better. There's also a never-ending balancing between a few important phenomena that we have written down here. First is between speech and writing, which was mentioned above. Authenticity and readability, which may be in conflict depending on what is meant by them, of course, as was discussed in detail in Prague last year. And thirdly, the differences from the written standard according to, for example, regional dialect and personal style. And now I'll go to more concrete features of our practices of reporting in the Finnish Parliament, first being the grammar of the speeches. In the Finnish Record Office, we don't treat all the grammatical features the same way. Instead, we divide them roughly into 4 categories. In speech sounds, the variation is usually standardized for the sake of readability. Exceptions are made only if the non-standard feature has particular rhetorical importance, for example, as a dialect marker that pinpoints the speaker into a certain regional or social group, if that seems very important in the speech. However, words are usually left as they are, because in our experience they don't usually damage readability, but may give important information about, for example, the regional background and personal style of the speaker. The combination of words or phrases thirdly, are sometimes altered slightly to help the reader. Some small differences from the standard language would also maybe draw more attention in writing than they do in original speech, because even the same feature may cause different ideologies or values or attitudes when seen in writing than when heard in speech. In sentence level, much personal variation is tolerated regarding, for example, word order, if it does not cause especially big problems for reading. However, there are many types of asymmetric structures in spoken language that result from the fact that speech production happens in real time. And these types of expressions are often changed to their written language equivalents if they are not particularly significant rhetorically. And we have one example of this kind. This is a remarkable thing, this government proposal where the subject of the clause is repeated, and it might be, for the sake of readability, be changed to this following example. This government proposal is a remarkable thing. The second group here is that we have chosen is self-corrections and planning expressions. So-called false starts and self-corrections are systematically corrected to match the speaker's final intention, if it is possible to know that from the speech without any far-fetched interpretation. Unfinished structures are avoided if possible, and if not, interruptions are marked with 3 full stops in the speech. And then secondly, planning expressions that are clearly results from the time-boundedness of the spoken language are removed if it does not change the meaning of the expression. There are of course borderline cases that must be treated always case-specifically. There are 2 examples here, one of from self-corrections and other of planning expressions. Of course, all these examples are originally in Finnish, but to be friendly here, we have translated them into English. We have more examples if some of you is interested, and we can send them to you by email. Secondly, blunders and slips of tongue are usually corrected or always corrected in obvious cases, unless other MPs bring them up afterwards. Then it would be very strange to correct them. The main principle is that an expression is considered a blunder if the right way of saying it can be considered common knowledge, either generally or within the parliament. Even so, it is sometimes very hard to distinguish so-called innocent blunders from ignorance. So there are many hard decisions to be made in this respect. There is one example up on the slide. And speaking of so-called ignorance, erroneous claims, false citations, and inappropriate conduct are not corrected in the record, because we think that it would contradict the principle of open information in the parliament. Another good reason for this decision is that the MP is always responsible for his or her speech, not the reporter who's doing the record. However, as was said before, the difference between blunder and ignorance is a very thin red line. There are 3 examples here. First, speaker says the name of the wrong poet when citing a poem. Then there's a wrong or inaccurate citation from a former president. And thirdly, there is an accusation that is forbidden in the Finnish parliament. You can't accuse someone of lying or as being a liar. But we think that that is not the reporter's problem, because that has happened in the parliament and it should be following the open flow of information. It should be recorded as it was. Other types of inappropriate conduct would be, for example, indiscreet word choices, swear words, etc. Non-verbal actions and events are marked in the record when the reporter feels that it's necessary. Regarding prosody, for example, emphasis of tone, emphasis or tone of voice, it is sometimes necessary to change the word order in Finnish in order to express the intended meaning in the record. And there's an example of it here. It is said somewhat like, there has been only conversation in that regard. But when it's written down, the word only seems to refer to a wrong word. So it's corrected to, there has been conversation only in that regard, which is the intended meaning in the speech. The gestures, movements and events are marked with square brackets when necessary in order to fully understand the speech as is shown in the second example. The last category that we present here is the so-called unnecessary words, as sometimes named like that. These include, for example, the aforementioned planning expressions, like in English, the words like, kind of, etc. Sentence initial particles that are very common in spoken language. It could be very confusing if none of them would be erased from the record, because they could sometimes even create sentences that would last the entire speech, because clauses in spoken language are very often connected to each other by these particles. And thirdly, mannerisms or expressions that the MP overproduces when planning the speech in real time. After saying this, it's important to ask, however, what makes us think something in the speech is unnecessary, and how can we be absolutely sure that it is unnecessary? Also, different people find different things unnecessary, and are we as reporters willing to make that choice for all the potential readers that may think differently? And then, as a last slide, we think that it could be interesting to consider some possible directions for further development in the reporting principles. The first could be to bring the written record even closer to video recording in order to move it further towards authenticity and also erase any so-called unflattering differences between the video and the written record. The opposite option would be to consciously move away from the original recording by standardizing the language of the written record. This would be favoring readability or possibly some aesthetic norms at the expense of authenticity, because there would always be the video recording available to those who want to know how things were specifically said. In this option, the video recording and written record are consciously distanced from another to fill different purposes. Even more radical would be to move towards written summaries of the discussion approved by the MPs. This would emphasize content over form and make the records shorter. However, this would give considerable power and responsibility to the reporters. And one remaining option would be to abandon the written reports altogether and replace them with video links to into the records. This option has been actually suggested once in the Finnish Parliament because it would bring considerable savings. However, it would also bring down the accessibility of the plenary session by making it harder to do automatic searches and statistics, quick browsing, and so on. We end this presentation in these words and would be eager to hear your opinions on the subject in the workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Eero. I think it triggered all of us because we recognized, at least I did, but I think all reporters, we recognized a lot of the difficult decisions you have to take as a reporter. And perhaps in the next workshops we will discuss about this. So thank you very much for the presentation. This is a little present for you, just a little present. Thank you. I see one hand in the air. Do you have a question? Wait, I'll give you the microphone.
Thank you. It was an interesting one. We'd like to ask, you mentioned this difference between blunder and ignorance. For example, this happens to us that, for example, when a speaker says something like as a result of blunder, not ignorance, for example, and other people say, okay, when there's a conversation going on followed by his blunder, or you say something for the first time, right? For example, this happened to us once, that he blundered and said something that he didn't mean, so the conversation went on. Is it reflected in the reports if this becomes a conversation?
Thank you for that interesting question. As I tried to say in my presentation, when someone is commenting the blunder, then we don't, of course, we don't correct it to the record, because it would be kind of comical that someone would comment a thing that isn't there. So then we do not make any changes. But if no one comments on the blunder and the speaker says it right the first or the third time or something like that, then we decide case specifically what to do. We could perhaps make a correction in that sense.
May I ask another question on this subject? But what do you do then if a person blunders? It's not commented in the debate, but afterwards it's heavily commented in the news, on television, in the papers, and you didn't put it in your report.
We didn't put it in the report, but it's commented afterwards anyway. Wasn't that what you meant?
That's in the news.
Yeah, news.
So you didn't take it up in the report, so you have missed something on television. They say it wasn't in the report, but it was said. Everybody can see it, the video, everybody can hear it.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of embarrassing, of course, if something like that would happen. But I don't know. We don't think. I think something like that has never happened in Finland. But if there's a strict contradiction between the written record and the audio record, then it's of course then it's important to correct the record afterwards. I think
that's the key of the discussion we are having at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. This is your USB stick.